Hi, I'm Jim DeCola, Master Luthier for Gibson Guitars. Welcome to Gibson's Guide to Guitar Setup and Maintenance. I'm going to show you how to set up and adjust your bass guitar. Now, adjusting your bass guitar is not entirely different from your standard guitar. However, because of the nature of the bass, with a longer scale length and heavier strings, the setup needs to be adjusted accordingly. And again, we have our specs and criteria that we follow, but you can always tailor it to your personal touch and preference. There's no hard rules with that. We just have our recommended specs and, in general, what bass players like. So the biggest difference is because of that extra length and the heavier strings, bass players typically want the action a little bit higher and a little bit more relief in the neck, which is that underbow curvature that is intentional, and pick up slower. Those are the main differences. And the reasons why are because with heavier strings, as you pluck that string, it has an excursion or an orbit. And because it's a heavier string, it has a wider orbit or excursion than a guitar string. That's why you want a little bit more relief in your neck and a little bit higher action with more dynamics, especially with a lot of modern playing styles with bass, you know, a slap and pop and all that. It's a very dynamic touch. And, you know, a higher action is a cleaner action. And especially if you're recording, you know, you can get away with a certain amount of fret buzz live, but when you're recording, a lot of times that tape or you know, the recording tells no tales. So a higher action will be a cleaner action. The same thing goes for your pickups. You know, if your pickups are higher and closer to the strings, you'll get more output. However, you'll have more chance of the string hitting the pickup or that pickup being so hot it'll break up the front end of that amp. So again, bass players will typically keep those pickups farther away from the strings. So to get started, just like guitar, you want to do everything in the proper order. So the first thing I'll do is check the neck relief. Now, I already made sure that the instrument is up to pitch. If not, if you're a step low, you know, if you adjust that neck, it's not going to respond in the same way. So make sure it's to pitch. And I'm going to install a capo at the first fret. That just makes it a little bit easier. And then I'm going to press the strings down at the 17th fret where it joins the body, or 16th fret. So that will allow me to use the string as a straight edge. And I'm looking for that gap between the bottom of the string and the top of the fret at the 7th fret. So the first thing I'll do is just visually test it. And I'm looking at it and I'm bouncing the string. And I can see I have a little bit of clearance, but that's very, very tight. For bass, it's recommended to have between 12 and 14 thousandths gap between the top of the fret and the bottom of the string. So I'll take my feeler gauge, and I have them already open to 12 and 14. So I'm going to take that 12 and slide it under there, and I can see that it's hitting the string. And it's good to check on both sides, because sometimes necks will have a little bit less relief on the treble side than on the bass side, because the thicker string will kind of pull it a little bit more, which is actually a good scenario because the larger the string, the more it has an excursion, so that'll give you more clearance, and that's actually optimum. So now I see that it's too tight, so now I'm going to go ahead and loosen the truss rod. Now we have our Gibson multi-tool. That's a fantastic tool, and it has your socket on there. However, here at the factory, we'll have these T-handle tools that we make here. And at the factory, it just makes it a little bit more convenient to adjust that neck. So I'm going to loosen it about 1/4 of a turn. I'll remove the capo, and now I'm going to tune it back to pitch to verify. And I like to hold it. You don't have to. You can do it on the bench, but I prefer to hold it in a playing position. By holding the instrument in playing position, you're not going to put any tension on the neck, which could affect the neck relief. Now I'll go ahead, it's back to pitch. It got a little flat because I loosened the neck a little bit. So now I will use the feeler gauge, press down the strings where it joins the body, and I'm looking for that gap. It's right at 12 on the G, and on the bass it's right at 14. So that's actually a very good scenario. Like I said earlier, you know, it's optimum because the larger string will have more excursion, so now it has the appropriate relief. At this point, the neck is adjusted. Now we'll want to verify the action at the 12th fret and at the nut. If the nut is too high and it's not within spec, what will happen is when you adjust your action at the 12th fret, to exaggerate, if your action's too high, the strings will slant down. So to adjust it to spec here will actually kind of give you, in effect, a lower action if your nut is unusually high. So the spec at the nut is 2/64 in the open position on the low E string and 1/64 on the G string. So I can see here we're in spec. So that's set. Now we're going to move on to the 12th fret spec. Our factory specs are 5/64 from the top of the 12th fret to the bottom of the G string and 7/64 from the top of the 12th fret to the bottom of the B string. Here we're looking at 6/64 on the low E string and 5/64 on the G string. So at this point, I'm going to raise up the bridge 1/64 on the bass side, you know, for the low E. G is fine, so we'll adjust that and then remeasure and retune. Now, I'll use my multi-tool. I'll use the flat blade for this particular bridge, and I'm going to turn it about 1/4 of a turn. And then I will remeasure to check my progress. It needs just a touch more. So I'll give it another 1/4 turn. And that's right at spec. And I'm going to go ahead and verify that G, because sometimes by lifting up one side of the bridge, it may raise up the other side ever so slightly, which it did, just a touch. So now I'm going to lower the G side, not even 1/4 turn. There we are. Now we're back at 5, and we're right at 7. So now we're at spec. I'll double check the pitch. Anytime, again, you move your neck or your bridge, your pitch will change. So make sure you retune after each adjustment. Now I'll verify the action after tuning, and we're right at 7, which is our target for the E string, and right at 5, which is our target for the G string. So now the action is to spec. And again, that's our factory spec. Every player is different. You know, if you have a lighter touch and you don't, you know, maybe use as much slap and popping techniques where you need a little bit more dynamic and headroom in that regard, you might get away with a lower action, and that's entirely up to you. Again, there's no rules that say you can't do that. It's everyone's personal preference. So we're at factory spec. Now, the next thing we're going to do is adjust the pickups. So for the pickups, again, I like to keep it in playing position, and our spec is 1/8 of an inch for both pickups. You can, again, you can get them closer. However, if you do, as that string has that excursion and orbit, it can kind of clank against the pickup, and you don't have as much headroom because that pickup will be hotter and it won't be as clean sounding. And most bass players are generally looking for a cleaner sound, at least a cleaner root sound, before they may color it later with effects. So I'm going to press both of the strings, the outside strings, the E and the G, and I'm going to use my ruler, and now we're looking for 1/8 of an inch on both sides of the pickup. So first I'll work on the rhythm pickup, and then I'll move to the bridge pickup. This is too close on both sides, so I'm going to use that Phillips screwdriver and drop it down. And sometimes you may see a pickup, you know, some of our pickups have our, you know, angled mounting rings, and depending on the setup of the instrument, sometimes it doesn't follow it exactly. So you may have one side slightly higher than the other. So in that case, I try to use the closest side as the side to make that final judgment call on. And again, even with the pickups, you have a certain amount of personal preference adjustment, and it's a good starting point. Once you get these adjustments made, go ahead and play it and see how it responds. If you feel that you can raise it up a little bit, try it. So now with the pickup adjustment, 1/8 inch is what our target is. So we'll depress both outside strings, the E or B if it's 5-string, and the G string at the highest fret, and we're looking for the clearance between the top of the pickup and the bottom of the string. And a lot of our pickups, if we have a mounting ring that kind of has that angle or wedge shape to it, sometimes it isn't going to be exactly parallel to the strings. In that case, I will use the closest edge of the pickup to determine how high that pickup will be. And in this case, we're going for 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to lower it just a little bit on the bass side. And we're at 3/32, so I'm going to lower a little bit on the treble side. There we go. We'll do the same thing on the bridge pickup. And we're using that same dimension, 1/8 inch on both sides. And again, that's just our happy medium factory spec. Feel free to experiment. There's no rule that you have to use these dimensions. It's just what works best for most people. Get to these dimensions, play it, see how it responds. If you feel like you need to raise it to get a little bit more output or a little bit more high end, go ahead and work in 64ths of an inch increments. So raise it a 64th, play it, listen to it, and then work from there. You can have maybe some players like 1/8 of an inch on the bass side of their rhythm pickup and maybe raise it a 64th on the treble side. And then the same thing on the treble pickup. You might raise it a 64th higher than the bass side just to kind of give it a little bit more mid-range and a little bit more output on that bridge pickup, and then raise it a 64ths of an inch on the treble side. So again, these are our general specs. It'll sound great and it'll get most players what they want, but feel free, and it's recommended and encouraged to kind of tweak it and adjust it to your own sound. Now I have both pickups adjusted to our factory spec. The last thing we would do would be then to adjust the intonation, because anytime you adjust the neck or adjust the bridge height or pickup height, that can affect the intonation of the instrument. So that we've covered in another episode. So you would adjust your intonation by adjusting your bridge saddles. And that's it. That will get your bass playing to its factory spec condition. And feel free, we encourage you to experiment and fine tweak that sound to your touch and your playing style. Stay tuned for the next installment of Gibson's Guide to Guitar Setup and Maintenance.